As the ambassador mentioned, my name is Marco Lopez. Over the course of my career, I had the opportunity and privilege to work with many of the individuals that I have the pleasure to introduce today. I want to highlight and mention my debt of gratitude to David Rousseau, the chairman of the host committee, for having us here today. David, thank you for your hard work. We appreciate your leadership, and thank you for the countless hours that you've dedicated to the effort, along with the McCain Institute, in inviting us and having the distinguished guests here. So let's give David a hand. I know that he deserves it and probably has not. Thank you. I also want to recognize Congressman Kristen Sinema, who is here today. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us. And also highlight the retired congressman who was my congressman in Nogales, Arizona, when I was mayor, Congressman Ed Pastor. Thank you for joining us as well. Alan Burson has spent a decade or decades working to improve the U.S.-Mexico security relationship. He first helped coordinate the U.S. government security strategy when he was U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California and served as the border czar under the Clinton administration from 1994 to 1998. Pause there quickly to say that Alan is also a huge football fan, and he played for Harvard in 1966 to 67 team. And although he's an East Coast kind of guy after leaving California, he tells me today that he's rooting for Seattle. So I don't know how that's going to work out for you, Alan, but best of luck with that. I had the pleasure of serving with Alan when he was Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection at the Department of Homeland Security. When he began in 2009, Arizona was experiencing an over 500,000 border incursions from Mexico yearly. Today, due to the efforts of Alan and the leadership of the department, that number has been drastically reduced to below 85,000. He has been an advocate for more focus on U.S.-Mexico trade and travel initiatives that facilitate the efficient movement of people and goods across borders. Alan has frequently said that the U.S.-Mexico relation are neither domestic affairs or international affairs. They are intermestic relations because their outcome impacts both countries. We look forward to Alan's participation as he moderates today's discussion. Carlos Slim Domit serves as chairman of the board of directors for Grupo Carso, Grupo Sanborns, and Telmex, and serves as co-chairman of América Móvil board of directors. América Móvil is currently ranked as the third largest mobile wireless company with nearly 365 million customer connections in 26 countries worldwide, the majority of them in Latin America. Carlos believes that providing world-class communications capabilities to people across Mexico is absolutely critical for them to access the educational resources and learn the skills required to succeed in the jobs of the future. That's why Grupo Carso announced that they plan to invest nearly $4 billion this year in Mexico's telecommunications, infrastructure, manufacturing, real estate, construction, and mining sectors. Carlos's enthusiasm and optimism for Mexico and Latin America's potential is contagious, and he is committed to helping this region meet its full potential. Also contagious is Carlos's love for Formula One, and he has been a leading proponent for bringing the sport to Mexico, along with the estimated $2 billion impact on the Mexican economy. But Carlos's true passion is his philanthropic work through the Telmex Foundation and the Carlos Slim Foundation. To date, it is estimated that the Carlos Slim Foundation's programs in health, education, social justice, economic development, and conservation, just to name a few, have benefited nearly 30 million people. Those efforts extend to the United States, where Carlos and his brother Marco, who's sitting back there in the audience, oversee two programs. One is called EveryoneOn.org, and the other AccesoLatino.org. Everyone's On's focus is connecting low-income student households to broadband, and AccesoLatino.org works to connect U.S. Spanish speakers to free online education, job training, civics, and healthcare information. After just 6 months of launching, nearly 200,000 people have accessed the site and are taking a free course or going through a job training program. I'm proud to work with Carlos as president of International Business Solutions, working with Grupo Carso and the Carlos Slim Foundation. And I'm excited to hear what Carlos views as the challenges and opportunities facing Mexico and this region. Mr. Juan Manuel Valle Pereña currently serves as the Executive Director of the Mexican Agency of International Development Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he leads Mexican policy efforts in international development cooperation. Prior to joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he was a head of Banking, Securities, Savings Department at the Mexican Ministry of Finance, where he played a vital role in Mexican financial policy design and implementation. Mr. Valle holds a bachelor's in economics from the Autonomous Technological Institute of Mexico and a master's in public policy from Princeton University. We look forward to hearing Mr. Valle's remarks on the current investment climate in Mexico and the importance of the U.S.-Mexico relationship as a way to strengthen North American economic leadership. Dr. Gerardo Irart is the CEO of Enal Group, an engineering company that specializes in the development of geothermal projects, from resource identification all the way to electric energy generation. Dr. Irart worked for Mexico's Federal Electricity Commission for more than 30 years, having made an important impact in numerous geothermal projects during his time there. As an internationally recognized expert in the field of renewable energy technologies, he has consulted for many international organizations, including the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the International Renewable Energy Agency. Today, Dr. Irart will provide us with important insights on North America as a competitive economic region, and specifically his thoughts on the impact that Mexico's recently opened energy sector will have on the North American energy leadership. We welcome the panel to Phoenix, Arizona. We were hoping to have better weather for you, but there are many folks from the East Coast, and I think that is what has caused the weather not to cooperate. Nonetheless, we look forward to hearing from all of them. Thank you, Mr. Alan Bersin.
Thank you, Marco, and I don't take responsibility for having brought the weather from Washington as I traveled here, and all will be well. I, too, want to thank David Rousseau for the opportunity and Marco Lopez for having organized this, and my fellow panel members for a subject of great importance, not only to Arizona, but to both of our countries. The format I'd like to suggest we follow is that each of us take 7 to 10 minutes to lay out the specific area of focus. For example, I'd like to just set the stage and the table for the discussion that Carlos will have of the business climate and the interaction between and among Mexico and the United States, the states of the border, and also, I take it, the North American vision that is coming. Juan Manuel, I trust, will discuss not only the investment climate, but also the importance of the development activities Mexico has undertaken in the northern rectangle of Central America, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, and Salvador. And Gerardo, an expert in energy, a subject of great importance to the future of our countries and of the region, will be able, I think, to provide important assets there. Now, with some success on the clicker, we can set the stage. So, as we think about the relationship, Marco Lopez, among other things, had taught me a phrase that I've used constantly, which is "El futuro ya no es lo que era antes." The future is not what it used to be. And in no place that I know of in the policy scheme of the United States can that be said in terms of the transformation that's taken place between Mexico and the United States, officially and otherwise, over the last 15 years. In fact, we need to recognize where we've come from to appreciate where we are and where we're going together. Because, in fact, for all of the talk, and now it's 10% of the Mexican people born in Mexico, 10% of the United States population, was born in Mexico today. 10% of the people who are living in Mexico from abroad are Americans, or even a greater percentage. So that we have to recognize, let's look candidly at where we were, because where we are today is so extraordinarily different. But the fact of the matter is that the border between the United States and Mexico was always a place of conflict and contention. And it's not surprising, because it was born in war, and it was settled by a treaty that was decidedly one-sided, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. So that always the line, La Línea, which it was known as, particularly in Mexico, was a very problematic reminder of an unhappy asymmetrical relationship in which the United States actually had conquered half of what was Mexican territory, from Arizona, California, up through the southern tier of Oregon was Mexico in the 19th century. And when you look at the way in which we cooperated or didn't cooperate on the border, it was a demilitarized relationship for the most part, but it was not friendly. In fact, it was at the border, La Línea, that divided us east to west, that we were most equal as a matter of law. And Mexico could assert its legal sovereignty to keep the gringos on the other side of the border. So, so the old U.S.-Mexico relationship was actually, we were distant there was a great book written in the 80s called Distant Neighbors. We lived next to one another, but we knew very little about one another for the most part. It was a contentious relationship, and in the 19th century, really up to in the 1980s, the case of Kiki Camarena, it was a very arm's length relationship. We did not have, for all of the talk, we did not have the kind of relationship that would benefit both peoples. When I became involved in the U.S.-Mexican border now almost 25 years ago, this is what it looked like, and the border between Baja California and California. The same was true, Marco can tell you, between Nogales, Sonora, Nogales, Arizona, and each of the twin cities, El Paso, Juarez, Brownsville, Matamoros, McAllen, Reynosa. It was back and forth among the people who lived there, but it was a disorganized, dysfunctional relationship. So one has to appreciate the extent to which the situation has, let me get this, nobody's going to chase me down here. Excuse me. What has happened is the situation with Mexico has really been part of a much larger change in the way in which U.S. national policy operates. So borders have always been the lines on a map that separate countries, one sovereignty, one empire from another. But in fact, in a global context, that is an old-fashioned view of what borders really involve in terms of an ongoing basis. So think about what globalization is. What is globalization? It's the cumulative effect of a massive flow of people, goods, ideas, images, labor, capital, electrons that go across the border lines that separate countries. And in fact, the way in which we analyze movements and borders in a modern world is that they are as much flows as they are lines. And this is a graphic, a visualization of shipping lines and in the world today. And you can see the activity between North America and Europe, the activity between Asia and North America. And if you focused in, you'd see the massive expansion of relationships in terms of trade between Mexico and the United States. But the idea of borders as flows of goods, people, electrons, ideas is central to the change that's taken place. And this is another visualization of the illicit flows. We have flows of cargo that is lawful, and we have also flows that are illicit, controlled not by multilateral corporations, but by transnational criminal organizations. The new U.S.-Mexican reality is actually based on this idea of flows. So instead of focusing on La Línea, the line, the border line east to west from San Diego and Tijuana to Brownsville and Matamoros, what is really taken over in the U.S.-Mexican relationship are flows north and south. Norte al sur, más importante que la línea este-oeste. The flows of goods, people, images, ideas, everything that constitutes globalization has taken place, and it's completely changed the relationship. When we focus on those flows north and south, we actually have reshaped the way in which Mexico and the United States look and work with one another at all levels. So in fact, what accounts for that is this massive increase over the time of the last 20 years of U.S.-Mexico trade from $80 billion to now more than $500 billion, $1.3, $1.4 billion a day back and forth across the U.S.-Mexican border, ida y vuelta. That is the new driving engine of this new relationship that I think has now taken firm root. It is enshrined and embodied in U.S.-Mexico public policy, beginning with the 21st Century Border Declaration that Marco Lopez was so involved in 2010 between President Obama and President Calderon. And the 21st century border relationship, the way in which we meet regularly to solve problems, has, again, symbolizes and reflects the new relationship. In fact, there is an agenda. There are timelines. There are things that we get done government to government that simply did not happen when we were focused on the line and the conflicts at the line rather than on the corridors north and south. And what we're beginning to see, and I trust that Senor Slim will address it, is that we really are having an integrated economy, shared production platforms that have completely transformed the way in which our bilateral economy works. This is not about, in fact, for every item that is exported to the United States from Mexico, 40% of the value is actually U.S.-based. For every item that is transported south, 15 to 20% of the value in many cases is Mexican origin. This is an integrated economy that will be the key to the future of ourselves as well as the other members of North America that we occupy together and share. And I want to keep to the, I'm going to keep my panelist colleagues to their 7 to 10 minutes, so let me go quickly. This depicts the integrated economy. These are the truck lines. Now that we've overcome the pilot issues with regard to long-distance trucking between Mexico and the United States, this is what the transportation system looks like. It's north-south. It doesn't stop at La Línea. I think when we have some time during our dialogue, I'd like to go into this, but it is central that we no longer look at security and expediting lawful trade as being mutually exclusive. So we do not have to raise the security level and slow down the traffic. And I want to explain that to you because it's key to the new economy. This idea that security and trade facilitation are opposites is actually an old-fashioned idea, but let me take that up in our further discussion. So I want to emphasize that the powerhouse that Mexico has become, Mexico now has the 13th largest economy in the world, $1.17 trillion. The OECD out of Paris predicts that within one generation, 2042, that Mexico will have a larger economy than Germany. It will have the 4th or 5th largest economy in the world. Americans, gringos, take notice. This is crucial to our growth and the prosperity of our country. And it not only involves the United States and Mexico, ladies and gentlemen, this is a North American phenomenon. And for me, North America is from Colombia to the Arctic. Colombia to the Arctic. And the job that we all have is to see accomplished by development over the next generation, not only of this massive growth of Mexico, which is already 50% middle class by any standard, and which is already a robust democracy by any standard in terms of congressional oversight, in terms of the debate that takes place in the media, in terms of the honesty of the elections, which I should point out that Mexico does not have hanging chads in Tamaulipas. So Mexico and Canada and Central America are the future. There are those who say that the next 50 years will be the Chinese century, and that the American century has come to an end. With all due respect to the remarkable transformation that has taken place in China that you will hear about in the next panel, the fact of the matter is that if we continue to build a relationship with Mexico and Canada, and we link Central America to the Mexican economic powerhouse, the next 50 years will see the end of the American century, but the beginning of the North American century. Our future, in terms of business, in terms of development, in terms of energy, is now an integrated phenomenon. Let me stop there and turn it over to Carlos Slim Domi to discuss the implications in terms of the border relations, the business climate between the United States and Mexico and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you to the Apollo Group for inviting me, to the McCain Institute, to Mrs. McCain, very nice panel, the one that started this session, and of course to the Super Bowl committee. David, thank you very much for having me. I'm very honored to be sharing this panel with Alan, with Juan Manuel, and with Gerardo, and with all of you. Let me divide my presentation in 3 different steps. The first one is the new era that we're living, and how does this change and impacts not only the economic, but as well the social relationship between our countries. The second is the economic state, or the economic views on this year and on the future, and then closing on the opportunities that both of these stages generates for our countries in the future. We all know that we are living a new era. Some of them call it the era of technology, the era of communication. I personally believe it's an era of access. It's an era that is giving us access to everything. Access to more entertainment, access to better purchases or better efficiencies in our economic and our daily life, but also it's giving us access as a society to get better education, to get better health, to get better jobs, and to get better opportunities. This era is based on the welfare of the others. The better the society is, the better the overall countries will be. It's an era where economic markets are relevant, and that is what makes the difference from one country to the other. It's an era as well where many of the lacks that didn't allow us to develop today become opportunities. The lack of infrastructure today is an opportunity to get investment, to build new job creation, and to build a stronger economy. Poverty today is not only a social issue, it's as well an economical need for the countries. The more people that can participate in the economy, the best the economy will be for everyone. That's why it's an era that at the end is based on the welfare of the whole, so the countries can generate a better economic and a better views on their future. It's an era as well that has many challenges. Some of these challenges is how can the leaderships make the paradigms that this new era demands become faster and with a less tension on those developments. Let me just mention some of them. We pass in our countries from the problems in the 70s and the 80s and before, even before, from the 60s of demographic growth, when the population was growing at a very strong ways. Today, demographic growth is not a problem anymore. Our demographic growth is very stable. Now the problem is the expectancy of life passed from 65 years old to almost 80 years old. And if you take the people that enters the economic activity, it goes almost to 85 years old. So the cost of governments in the social side of the social programs that we have needs to be updated. People requires every time less physical effort and more mind effort in this new services era. And also the cost for governments to be able to give what the society needs to change these kind of paradigms. And we are seeing it in many countries, changing the age of retirement, lowering the work base. So it's a process where societies are adapting, passing from the industrial era to this new technological era. Many of our countries, or many of the countries of the world, we see the three eras combining, the agricultural, the industrial, and this technological and communications era. It's an era that we see the changes happening very fast. It's an era that lives on the second, not only on the day, but lives the information and all that we get. We're living in a real-time world. We're going into a world that speaks in 180 characters, and we're going to an age where suddenly we see companies that are very recent, no, almost less than 1 decade founded, that today have more customers than the whole population of China. Companies like Facebook that today have a customer base or a loyalty fund, usage of people that makes them the biggest country in the world. We have celebrities like Katy Perry, who I believe is singing on the Super Bowl, that has more followers than most of the political parties in the world. We see people accomplishing what many years couldn't make, like taking dictatorships very long, suddenly out of power. And that is another part of the access that this era gives. It gives people the power to participate and to be relevant in the daily life of our societies. It's an era, as I was mentioning before, where lacks becomes opportunities. And that's what takes me to the second stage, the economic environment. Today, the relationship, as Alan was mentioning, between Mexico and US is closer than ever, not only on the economical side, but as well in all the different areas, particularly the social one. It's a stage where Mexico not only has a very stable macroeconomic figures, very sound and very healthy public finance, but also has made the changes that this new era requires. Some of the paradigms that I was mentioning before require big efforts and tough attitudes and leaderships to change these paradigms to make the country become available to get to this new stage. Mexico has done it through the reforms and through the different processes that Mexico has had. Now the perspective on the future, particularly on the economic developments, look ahead with a very, very positive future, particularly on energy, on electricity, and all the different areas where the potential of our country is quite important. The other one is infrastructure development. The capacity to build so many infrastructure programs will bring not only a strong investment program to Mexico, but also a huge employment opportunity to people. somebody was telling me the other day that some of the similarities that many of the countries has today is because their inability to give employment to people under 30 years old. And the problem is not if we are going into an era, to this new era or not. It's not something that is optative. It's how long it will take and how much tension will generate from passing from one to the other. So I will say that in Mexico, the structural changes that needs to be done for the country to move forward with a very positive and strong future ahead has already done. Now what we need to do is to consolidate all these changes to keep the country growing as fast as we can. So we have a strong macroeconomic situation. We have a lot of projects coming ahead. And one thing that is different from this era to the others that we live in the past decades is the interest rates. Interest rates are lower than ever and on a long-term basis. And that allows that any project can be financed or any project can find resources to being built. The other part, which is the best news for us on the economical side, is the growth of U.S. U.S. is starting to gain growth again, and that growth always has been the best medicine for Mexico on the economical side. So I think for the next years, for both countries, what we are going to see is economies growing, generating more jobs, and generating more opportunities of building things together. What is good for U.S. is good for Mexico, and what is good for Mexico is as well good for U.S. We will have a present and a future with less energy cost. No? That will boost the productivity and the capacity in Mexico. Our exchange rate today is in a very competitive way, so our trade balance as well will become stronger. But again, I think the most important is that the changes that needs to be done have already happened, and now the opportunities ahead can be quite big. Other is comparing Mexico and Latin America, particularly Mexico with countries like China, for example. We have 11,700 GDP per capita against 7,500 from China. We are almost double in GDP per capita. We are a country totally open. No, we are a country with presence of American and international companies. So every dollar invested in Mexico, in a big part, comes back to the U.S. economy. We have huge opportunities where investment can participate in any area they want today in Mexico. They are not limited to some of them. But the other part is that whatever dollar is invested in Mexico against Asia is coming back in a big piece. As well, the presence of American organizations, institutions, companies in Mexico is quite high. Today we are the biggest, I think we are number three in the auto industry regarding exports. And the moment that we're living, both of the countries, we are on the same stage, and particularly with the same perspectives again on the future. On the social side, as Marco was mentioning before, we're very active because we believe that today technology offers the opportunity to people to get access to things that they didn't have before. For example, on education. Today we can say that children connected in a very poor community to broadband and to the right content can have access to the same education that children in a top school is accessing. So the equalization of opportunities this will bring allow us to say that in less than one generation, many of these things can get balanced and get the right opportunities for people, as I was mentioning, in education, in health, and in many other things. And that will make, if we put that together with economic future opportunities, together with the link that every time is getting closer between both our countries, that will allow both societies to develop together, and of course to develop both countries in a with a very good future ahead, but particularly with more inclusion and with more development for all. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you for the invitation on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, the Undersecretary for North America is with the Minister, with Mr. Kerry, and with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada in Boston in a meeting that they were planning for a while. Without any doubt, a stronger relationship between Mexico and the U.S. Will make a more competitive region, and that benefits all. Many of the elements were put into the presentation by Alan, so I will not go over all the data, but I think it is important to reinforce some of the things that were mentioned before. The relationship between Mexico and the U.S. has been growing quite fast after NAFTA was signed. Before 1994, the trade of Mexico with the U.S. represented only 8% of the trade of the U.S. As of today, it represents more than 13%. From Canada perspective, that has reduced from 20 to 16%. So we believe that importance is growing and will be growing towards the future, and we will be fighting with China in terms of who is the most important trade partner of the U.S. It was mentioned the fact that 40% of the exports out of the exports of Mexico to the U.S., 40% are goods that were manufactured in the U.S. originally. The U.S. content is very important. That's not the case with China. That's not the case even with Canada. And that's very important because that means that every employment that we generate in Mexico is employment that it's also generated in the U.S. For many U.S. states, Mexico is the most important trade partner. That's the case, obviously, for Arizona. That's the case for Texas. That's the case for New Mexico. But we are the second most important trade partner for 17 states in the U.S. So more integration is good for both countries. And that's also true if we look to Central America. If we do the same logic towards Central America, if we try to integrate them, we will all benefit from the possibilities that we have towards the future, mostly in manufacturing. NAFTA has been really good for trade, but it has also been really good for investment. Some of the elements were also mentioned before, the size of the U.S. investment in Mexico, the size of Mexico's investment in the U.S., and we have leading companies that have been actively engaged in the North American market. We have the leading bread company now, which is Bimbo. We have the leading dairy products company that it's Lala. We have the leading tortillas and corn-related products that it's Grumman, Mission Foods, and obviously we have América Móvil playing a very important role in a very interesting segment particularly, which is prepaid, which is something that has done very well in Mexico and in other countries and is very important in the US. It has been a priority to enhance the economic relationship in the recent past. As it was mentioned by Alan, officially, it was not until 2010 that we began collaborating bilaterally on the border. That gives us an idea of what was the only important item in the agenda before. So although everything in the economy was blooming, it seemed that the only things in the bilateral relationship were bad things. It seems that the governments only concentrated in the bad things, in immigration, in drugs, in security, etc. And that was not the fact. And that's clearly not the priority today. When President Obama visited Mexico first time last year, 2 years ago, a priority was placed on the high-level economic dialogue where the Ministry of Finance in Mexico is fully engaged. That resulted in many other things happening around, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, together with our Mexican Council of Business People, working together in putting recommendations for the governments to work towards very particular goals. Here we have infrastructure, we have border-related issues, we have transportation, we have human capital development. If we go to human capital, and that's important because of manufacturing and advanced manufacturing, we began with a number of 14,000 students from Mexico in the US. This year we had a little bit more than 25,000. The intention is to have in 2015 41,000 and get up to 100,000 by 2018 in all sectors. Postdocs, PhDs, masters, undergrads, but also English. For a relationship to grow stronger, we need our people to understand better what's going on the other side of the border. Select USA, together with ProMexico, have been working hard in building these business missions, these conferences, to allow our businesses to know each other and to work together. We have seen an important increase in the number of visits of US governors with business delegations to Mexico, trying to do exactly the same. There are a lot of opportunities, there are a lot of areas that we see with more potential than others. Clearly, automotive and aerospace are the two leading opportunities, but agri-food, energy, renewables, pharma, medical devices, medical tourism, electric and electronic, and IT are very important areas of opportunity for the relationship. The reform process is key for the perspective, the future perspective in Mexico. The reform process was not driven to attract financial investment. It was driven to attract real investment. We believe what is important is FDI. For a country that is the third after Germany and South Korea, measured by the advanced manufacturing exports to GDP, we believe that that's the way to go. We believe that that's where we should be concentrating, and we understand perfectly well what we have already done with the US after NAFTA was formalized. So the reforms are there for increasing productivity and competitiveness. We believe that labor and education fit perfectly well in that direction. And obviously, energy is the most important one because of many things, from foreign direct investment to the sector to making our energy sector more competitive and providing cheaper energy to the families, but also to the manufacturing sector. So we believe that after the reforms, we are a better destination for investment. Some of the results will be seen in the medium and long term. That's the case for manufacturing because they will have a better platform for what they do and lower energy costs. But also in the short term, we believe we will have an important surge in investments in energy. We expect more than $12 billion per year in additional FDI. But in some other areas where we saw liberalization in the size of foreign investment. And finally, if we look towards Central America and the Caribbean, that's the key area for Mexico to invest in development. We believe it is crucial that we help the region develop. If the region improves the situation, we will all improve our situation. We will see less immigration. We will see less insecurity. We believe, and we have the experience with the US, that integration is very positive, and that's exactly what we are trying to do. Our most important cooperation project towards the region has different components. I will refer to a couple of them. Infrastructure, we have invested as grants more than $150 million in the last 3 years in highways, in ports, in electricity, interconnectivity in the region. We have a social component also. Health is an important part. We have worked with all the ministers of health in the region to identify the priorities. And the first part of the program required an investment of $300 million. Out of those $300 million, half were invested by the countries, and the other half were invested by 3 very important donors: the Carlos Slim Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and the government of Spain. So we're working with the region in their priorities. We believe development in the region is important, and clearly the top item in the agenda towards the future with the region is energy. We believe that if we can deliver cheap energy to the region, we will be able to replicate the model that we have seen as of today, and we can have a lot more manufacturing in Central America, and that will allow for an improvement in the development in the region. And clearly gas plays a key role, pipelines towards the region, but also exporting electricity from Mexico to the region will be important.
Thank you for the invitation. And I like the words with what Alan began, that in Mexico and the US, we are neighbors, and we had a lot of problems, and we have many problems that we have to solve, but also we have a lot of opportunities that we have to work hard on that to make use of that. I will speak a little bit about energy. Canada, US, and Mexico, we can be the largest oil producer in the world. And now that we have in Mexico recently passed the law with the energy reform, we are prepared to receive all that investment to increase our production in oil and gas and also in electricity. And to do that, let me point out 3 aspects that we need to improve to accelerate this integration. First, we don't want to have the big companies coming to Mexico and hire Mexicans as driver carpenters. We want to get involved in the engineering part and in the scientific part of this highly technical development that is energy. And to do that, first, we would like to get a better integration with the US, and our president has put it very clear, exchanging scientific information, sending students to get their PhDs into the US, and having Americans back in Mexico to work with us. So to increase the scientific side, to find solutions for the problems that still exist in electricity and in the oil industry. Second, and not less important, is the exchange of technology, not for writing papers, but for solving problems in the field. We need to work together with the companies that will arrive to extract the oil and generate electricity in Mexico to assimilate the technology that is the best one in the world at this moment. And third, on the engineering side, we already realized that when you build something, it's not just enough that you know how to calculate that. You need to be certified. We need certified welders, certified in all of the subjects that we work. We need certification, somebody that's saying, yes, that's well qualified to do the job. And also to use the standards that are universally, or at least in North America, accepted to do the job. So we have to be in the same line, integrated in certification and also in the standards we use. Also, this integration evidently has a lot to do with physical integration. We only have at this moment 12 points where we exchange electricity with the US. We have to have direct current interconnection for big transportation of electricity across the border, and to have much more connections on that, and also to have better connections on the gas and oil pipelines that can connect the US fields, the Canada fields to the US and to Mexico, so that we can balance this production and make use of these reserves that we have that are enormous. Also, in this context, we have something that is smaller but is growing very fast, especially in the US, is the renewable energies. In the US now, wind and solar have grown very fast. US is still the #1 in geothermics. And in Mexico, we have as much geothermal resources as in the US. We have perhaps more wind in the Tehuantepec region. We have a lot of solar. So we have to increase our production in those 3 subjects. And also, some 15 years ago, when Mexico was #3 in the world in geothermics, perhaps part of the secret was that we had an agreement with the Department of Energy of the US, and we worked together, especially at the border with the California universities and Nevada and Idaho, to work in geothermics. And this is the way we got this big jump in that matter. And finally, talking about North America is too big, too general. Let me tell you a little bit about a specific point that is the border of Baja Sonora and California, Arizona, where we have to take care of energy, including water. Water is one of our main problems in the US and in Mexico, in the West Coast, that we have to save water, to use better techniques to recycle water, but we will always need some more amount of water, some more water for irrigation, for the population, and that will come from desalination. Desalination, people don't like it very much because for every cubic meter of seawater you take from the sea, you get 1/2 to produce fresh water, and the other half cubic meter goes back to the sea with twice the salinity. Well, in Baja, we have the largest producer of salt in Guerrero Negro with big lagoons for evaporation. At that place, we can install large desalinating plant and give this seawater with twice the concentration for this exploitation of salt. And this can be done, and we are working on that. So my final conclusion is that there are many places where we can work in small things, like in this water and energy problem with a big cluster involving California and Arizona and Baja and Sonora.
Thank you. Thank you to my colleagues, and I think perhaps more so than many of us have thought here in the United States. In fact, the future is not what it used to be, and we need to get on to continuing to make the changes and the adjustments on the local level, as Gerardo indicated, to achieve the benefits that Carlos and Juan Manuel indicate it here. What I'd like to do is open it up. We have remaining time, and I think it's an opportunity to hear from the audience. Thank you.
The presentations you made were extremely impressive, but we are a consumer's good manufacturing company and very active in the International Housewares Association, which represents or includes almost all the major manufacturing consumer goods housewares companies in the country of the United States and abroad. The big concern that we have noticed, and I've seen from many U.S. companies, even those with facilities in Mexico, is concerns around security. And some of those companies, many of them, refuse to let their executives even travel to the Mexican factories. What is your plan or your expectation for how that concern will be dealt with and how we can more readily feel comfortable resolving it?
A very important, and if I might, from the U.S. Homeland Security perspective, it is a concern. But I suggest, and I do so respectfully, that there's again a lag between the facts on the ground and the perception in the media, and even among many corporate boards and corporate CEOs. The fact of the matter is that there has been significant violence in Mexico as a result of the transnational criminal organizations and the changing narcotics pattern. But if you look at the progress that's been made in Mexico in terms of the decline in the homicide rate, and in fact the localization where the problem has been, if you would find that in fact the violence is no longer in the centers that it was, that it's now still in Tamaulipas and Matamoros as it affects cross-border operations, but in fact, it's in the South, and it is, with, again, intelligence would, corporate intelligence would reveal that it's not in the major manufacturing centers in the way that had been the case 7, 8, 10 years ago. So I think it's important that we actually get a handle on what the violent situation is, because you will remember that there was a period a generation ago in which the most violent country in the Western Hemisphere was the United States. And in fact, the changes that were made there give us now the lowest crime rate in 30 years. But if you look at the crime rate on the U.S.-Mexican border, for example, you'll find that on the U.S. side, 2 of the 5 safest cities in the United States, 3 of the 10 safest cities, Phoenix, San Diego, and El Paso, are now right on the U.S.-Mexican border. That the situation in Mexico is improving, that there is it took us 30 years to beat the mafia in the United States, to turn La Cosa Nostra into the Sopranos, right? That's, in fact, we have to remind ourselves that there was a commitment to do away with the mafia in the United States. It took us 30 years. Mexico is well engaged in that process. It will take time for Mexico to develop an authentic police presence, corruption-free. I would only point out that we had very corrupt local law enforcement in this country 30 years ago, and that we've actually moved toward that. The important thing is the trajectory is right. On the specific violence situation, though, I would actually ask you to look at the facts, because I think the perceptions really do lag the reality in many respects. Do we have another question and for members of the panel?
Thank you to the panel for your presentations. Canada, Mexico, USA, largest producer of oil and gas in the world. What do you think, what are your views on the impact of the drop in the price of oil?
Well, certainly there are mixed effects. On the one side, low energy prices are very good for the U.S., and that drives our exports up, as it has been seen in the last months. Manufacturing, automotive have been growing steadily. On the other side, clearly we are an exporter of oil, a lot smaller than what everyone would imagine. I think it has also to do with perceptions. Only 7% of our exports are oil related. We are a net importer of gasoline. So what happens at the end is a combination of our exports being hit, our flexible exchange rate playing in our favor, the hedging of the oil prices for this year allowing us to keep the same level for the budget, and an important increase in our tax related, the revenue related with gasoline. Because since we have kept a fixed price on gasoline, last year or 2 years ago, we were criticized for subsidizing gasolines, and now our tax is approximately 70% of the price of gasoline in the US. So our expectation in the long term is that low energy prices will not keep at today's level. We will have to cope with the current situation with an impact which will be very minor because of these elements, but we are also growing in the importance of our renewables, and that in the longer term will help to the balance.
Yeah, I think you addressed it very complete. I will just add that in the projects that we're studying, we still see a lot of interest in them, and combined with what Juan Manuel say about the lower cost of energy, the hedging that the government did, protecting the budget this year, the price of the gasoline that in the domestic market gives a better margin as well to the income of the government, and the cost of energy, the whole combinations make more, the views on the future of Mexico doesn't change with the oil price. Even in some cases, it's better because of the cost of energy that will increase the productivity.
Maybe a final word for Gerardo, and then we'll wrap up the panel and keep to the time schedule.
We had the most of our hope in the shale gas for the production of electricity. Shale gas in Mexico still is affordable with $35 per barrel of the oil, of the Mexican oil. So the business of shale gas is still profitable. Of course, it's much better when the price is near the $100. But I am a strong believer that we have to integrate technology, education of people, and physical connection of electricity and pipelines, and to be this North American group that we dream to be the most important one in the energy industry in the near future.
Thank you. Let me thank my colleagues on the panel, and for all of us to thank the CEO Leadership Huddle for the opportunity to make this presentation. Thank you very much.